Welcome to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. We interview great guests who inspire you to overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Be sure you visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, just relax as you listen. You can do something else, but be ready to make an important note. And let's get started.
Our guest today is Angela Legh, and the title of this interview is Escaping Painful Feelings Can Be a Prison of Our Own Making. Today we have a heavy subject. 3,700 kids attempt suicide every day in the U.S. In fact, suicide is the second leading cause of death for kids aged 10 through 24. Angela's children's book series, the Bella Santini Chronicles, plants seeds of emotional mastery in kids aged 8 through 12, so they are prepared to face the struggles of the teen years. Angela will provide tools and tips on this interview to help overcome adversity. Now, Angela's biography. Angela's father was a raging alcoholic who abused his daughters in every way. As a child, she made a decision to reject anger. Her father was angry and she didn't want to be like him. She grew up and married a man with a similar background to her, but he embraced anger as his go-to reaction. She had an emotionally abusive marriage. She stayed for 32 years until a wildfire destroyed their home. This event caused her to reassess her life and choose her needs before his for the first time. She went on a journey of self-discovery and learned many tools for emotional mastery, which she now shares with children through her stories. That is a fantastic story. Welcome, Angela Legh. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tony. I'm really pleased to be here, talk to you, and hopefully share tips and tools that help your audience overcome adversity. I don't want people to have to go through what I did in order to learn.
I'm looking forward to this discussion very much because I think it's important to talk about things like this, and people really shy away from it. People really don't even like to talk about death in general. But death was one thing, is completely natural, but suicide is not. So we can, it's an avoidable situation. I venture to say in 99% of the circumstances. So and I have my own story, which when I find the perfect segue, I will talk. I'll mention it. But I want to hear what you've got to say for sure, because this is really great stuff, and I relate to it in many levels, and it's very important to talk about. Now, you had a hard childhood. You want to say something before I start my questions?
Well, it's just that, yes, I did have a hard childhood, and everything that happens to us teaches us something, and whether we like it or not, if I could I would totally redo my childhood, but I don't have that option. What I do know is that the things that I learned, it took me a lifetime to figure out, but I know, as my bio said, that I rejected anger. And that is one of the things that made my marriage so toxic, because not only did I not allow myself to feel anger, but I judged it in other people. And so my ex-husband, who, for him, anger, he grew up in a house where the loudest person won. And so yelling and conflict was normal for him, and that's kind of how he defaulted in his life. For me, that was horrific. To be yelled at just caused me to shrink into a small ball. And over the course of 32 years, I ended up holding my tongue to avoid having conflict. I ended up swallowing my opinions and just slowly over time didn't even allow myself to be me. And when I say that when I left after the fire, that was the first time I chose myself. The reason I stayed in the marriage was I knew that if I left, it would hurt him. And I could not be responsible for hurting another person purposefully. And so I stayed. But after the fire, after I started realizing some of the truths that I now know, I came to the conclusion that me staying was just prolonging the problem, that it was equally hurting him and myself for me to stay in the marriage as it would for me to leave. And that was when I came to the conclusion that I did, for my sake, I needed to leave.
Let me address anger firstly. Anger can manifest itself in different ways. For me, I was very angry as a young person, but I didn't do the yelling and hollering thing. I didn't try to intimidate people. That wasn't my gig. Well, to back it up, my father left home when I was 10, and that became a terrible sadness, to say the least. Yeah. And that sadness became a terrible rage. That's which is not uncommon, to say the least. It's really rather natural, but it was a terrible rage at the world, great anger at the world. And I would have blown the world up if you showed me where the button was without hesitation. Fortunately, I didn't have access to that button. I love, are you familiar with the self-help course, personal development course, A Course in Miracles?
Oh yes, I did. I took that.
Yeah. What did you think of it?
It's a fabulous course. I would recommend it to anyone. Yes. It really helps you go into your heart and feel the love, because our hearts are where love resides. And you could feel the love and know that you are love. And what my children's books teach, or the message I try to get across, is that you are magic, and the magic that you are is love.
Yes, I concur. I agree wholeheartedly. So when I first came across A Course in Miracles, this is in the 90s, I read something that so blew me away that I had to stop. I couldn't continue because the truth of it was so monumental to me and so definitive. And this is one, like in the opening paragraphs, and the book says, quote, and I'll never forget it, I know it verbatim, and I never memorized it. It just so struck me. It said, quote, "If the truth were up to you, you would have already destroyed yourself," end quote. And I cannot forget that. It is burned in my brain, in my mind. So the truth was not up to me. It was for me to accept the truth. And this has been my journey, I think, for many, or if not all people's journey, to accept the truth themselves, the world as it is, and not as they would want it. And I know I'm a recovering addict. I've been clean and sober over 20 years. That's the whole thing, is acceptance. The whole thing is accept myself, accept the world, accept others, right? And you got to make choices too, as you're really talking about. But the reason why now was a bit of not a digression, was a bit of a, I built up what I was about to say now. Now, when I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, I just had it right there. But it was okay. The anger, I'm sorry. It was perfect. It was a perfect segue. I'm sorry. It
No,
was,
so you know what? I do just want to say something that I was in judgment of anger because of the way that I was brought up. And I decided as a very young child that anger is bad,
yes.
which is what a 5-year-old mind will do. You know, this behavior is bad. I can't do that. But anger, all emotions are simply information,
Yes.
and they're only an emotion. So we don't need to judge them as good or bad. It's just important for us to feel them from what I say is a space of neutrality. And that kind of throws people off. So I want to explain it. I've noticed that people will either grab onto an emotion. So let's take grief as an emotion.
There's a good one.
They will grab onto it and they will make it their identity. I'm a widow and I'm grieving, and there's no space in there for any joy to come in, no space for anything other than that emotion that they've grabbed onto. I call it entanglement. And that is a burden that they carry on through their life until they're willing to let it go. The other aspect is to reject a feeling, which I did. I suppressed anger, but I also rejected anger and judged it in other people. And unfortunately, no matter how much we try to avoid an emotion, if we are engaging in it by entanglement or rejection, we're carrying that emotion with us and it sticks. This came so clearly to me. A few years ago, I was talking to my aunt. She's a Reiki master. She's just this beautiful soul. And she said something that really blew me away. She said that my father, her brother, was a sensitive soul and he was too sensitive for this earth. I thought my dad was a monster. And this caused me to really consider what was going on. And I knew that he had been abused by his father. I knew that his father had emotionally abused him, cut him down, told him he was a loser, that he would never measure up. And that those feelings were something he entangled with. And he wanted to reject them also. So he numbed them with alcohol. But because the feelings were with him, his behavior while being drunk was something that perpetrated the feelings of him being a loser. And I realized, I started connecting the dots, and it's like, oh my gosh, so my dad escaped his feelings with alcohol. That was a prison of his own making. Because if he could face those feelings and accept that that was a perspective of someone else and it doesn't have to be his perspective, he wouldn't have to drink. And then he could have been a good dad. He could have been the kind of person I know he wanted to be. And then me rejecting and suppressing anger caused me to be very reactive in my marriage to anger, and thus creating, as one leg of that two-legged stool, I created that toxic atmosphere by my judgment of him, and he reacted. So, you know, it was an equal Opportunity
It,
toxicity.
it was a tango. This is a huge topic. Feelings, their suppression, alcoholism, judgment. We're gonna get into it, but let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor real briefly, and we'll be right back with Angela Legh.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Petrozza. What if there was a self-improvement program truly personalized to you, that knew and cared for you deeply? That whatever was going on in your life adapted for you perpetually. Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can start a program that will always suit you, considering all the pressures and nuances of your life.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. I'm here with Angela Legh. We're talking about a great subject with a number of facets. And we just left off at feelings. And it's a critical thing. I mean, if you're a human, you might be familiar with this thing called feelings, though you might hate them, right? And long ago I said, oh, feelings are a great curse. But, and that may be, they may be, but they're also a blessing too. You can't know joy without knowing great sorrow. Well, at least the greater sorrow, the greater joy, at least in that dichotomy. But I want to talk about feelings for a moment and let you continue, because you're saying great stuff here about this complex human interaction and an experience of judgment and feelings and how you get part of something that you don't want to, that you want to not be, but you're as critical a factor as the other. And feelings, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a recovered drug addict. I've been clean and sober a very long time. Very early in my recovery, I realized that feelings was really the linchpin thing. Well, the greatest skill I had to learn was the ability to feel my feelings. And I was already into personal development. And indeed, recovery from addiction is nothing but personal development. And an addict must transform from addict to a recovering or recovered addict. That's a necessary personal development. And so these feelings, what about feelings? I hated feelings. I despised feelings. My favorite feeling was numb. Mm-hmm. That's what my favorite feeling was. And so I borrowed and codified something from I think it was the Sedona method out of Sedona, Arizona. Mm-hmm. Which you're probably familiar with. And this method, I just made it 3 simple. I just focused on my feelings, but then in that process, I codified this thing I call it IWA. IWA is an acronym: identify, willing, and acceptance. It's all about acceptance. And then where I identify the feeling, what am I feeling? You got to name it. You got to name it. Yep. Okay. Right? Can't call it good. Good sucks. All right. Call it joy, call it delight, call it anger, call it sadness, fear, whatever, doesn't matter. The reality is, the truth is that we're all designed to feel feelings. That's part of the human design. Even though to me it was a credible fiction that I'm supposed to feel feelings. I'm supposed to run from feelings. And of course the great irony is that what I resist persists. The feeling, the more I suppressed my feelings, the longer it stayed and worse. I created a harbor for my feelings. So the first one is to identify. W, willing. Am I willing to feel the feeling? This is critical. Again, what I resist persists. So become willing. I had to become willing. Now, what if I wasn't willing? Well, then I had to just hold on, work out, had a network of other recovering addicts, alcoholics, reach out to them. Don't act out. Avoid trigger or avoid making things worse because I'm not willing to feel my feelings. So then, am I finally willing? Okay, great. I'm willing to feel this fear, say, right? Then go to the third one, A, acceptance. Is it okay to feel this fear or whatever? And if it's yes, awesome. Then what's going to happen? It's going to quickly change, because that's what feelings do. They quickly change. Or if I'm not, it's not okay to feel the feeling. Same thing as number 2 with the willingness, because until I become okay to feel my feelings, I have a danger of acting out on them, or again, just extending their stay in my body. And the more I did this, the better I got at feeling feelings. Now I love feelings. I used to hate them. Now I love them. Now I so embrace them as part of a part of what's reality, of what's real, this human experience, and it's great. And life's not, not all roses,
No.
but it's a hell of a lot more doable knowing that feelings are here, as you said, signals or information. They're not random, they're not arbitrary, right? And of course, it's almost a secret, incredibly. The feelings I get come from the thoughts that I have. So what thoughts am I having? That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I love your method of feeling feelings or dealing with feelings. I teach a little bit slightly different. You feel the feeling. So it's not a willing to feel. You just notice, how does this feeling feel? Is it sharp? Is it dull? Is it in my head? Is it in my stomach? Just be aware of the feeling. And then you accept. It's basically, you name the feeling. So you're acknowledging the feeling. So you feel, you acknowledge, and then you accept. Just the same as what you are talking about. The key, though, because people get caught up on the accept part, the key is understanding you are not accepting the circumstances that created the way you feel. You are accepting that it's appropriate and okay. You're giving yourself permission to feel what you're feeling. And that key of giving yourself that permission to feel means that the energy moves. And like you said, it just goes away. So we spend our lifetime avoiding a feeling that if we just face it, it could be gone in 2 minutes.
Much less than that, too.
Yeah.
Of course, I know I love your method, and it's really just another way, or a very similar way. I'm an NLP practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming. So when you talk about finding the where it is in your body, NLP is all about that and much more. But yes, find it in your body. You can feel it. It's a sensation. But I think a primary reason why I came up with that that willingness, is that again, I was a recovering addict, still am. I like the ing, keeps me at work, as opposed to the ed, past tense, recovering addict. Anyway, so willingness, I found in addiction recovery that willingness is the most important thing in recovery. Whatever I was unwilling to do was the recovery that I wouldn't have. So willingness to feel the feeling, I had to come at it in a quasi-aggressive way, not just a mere acknowledgement, though that's essential, but to will, I'm willing, as opposed to, a more nonchalant or more observant. I had to be more proactive in it. That was where I came from, and that's awesome. That's fine. It's that we were.
It is.
But but I think that willingness was my version of of permission. But permission is the thing.
It is the thing. And even though I call it this way, I know Dr. Donald Epstein, he calls it AAA. It's all in your IW, whatever.
IWA. What's AAA?
It is
Acknowledge.
It's acknowledge and accept. And I forget what the first A is.
We'll figure it out. It'll come to us later on.
But it's the same thing, basically. And we all came at it from our own perspective. And so it's key for your audience to know you could take Tony's way if that's the one that really resonates with you. You could take my way if that resonates with you. It's what works for you.
Now it came to me when I said I lost my train of thought about anger, and I had this genesis of rage, of sadness and rage, and it became dysfunction, and I knew that I had all these issues, and I became on a very deliberate journey to heal myself and to recover and to become changed from dysfunctional to functional, and to be a person of personal development who, searches and embraces his potential, which is the opposite of what I always had something to say. I didn't want to hear anything else. All I wanted to do was let you know how angry I was. And that's where I came from. And you said, you had a hard childhood, but how did that impact your adult life? You talked about you stayed in the marriage 32 years, but
Yeah. So mostly, I was in denial of what happened. My subconscious blocked a lot of memories, and it was only after talking to my sisters that I can recall and know what happened. And I really, my mom divorced my dad when I was 10 years old. At the same time, other friends from school, their parents were divorcing, and all the kids around me saw it as this terrible thing that was happening in their family. But I saw it as, oh my gosh, freedom. We're not going to have to experience that anymore. And so it was like walking through another door into a whole new adventure. And I think that ability that I have of seeing a situation that others can be broken by, and seeing it, okay, what is the opportunity for me here? And that's not a special skill that I have. It's not a gift that I have. We all have the ability to choose how we react and how we feel about something. And for some reason, I just tend to default to this terrible thing that happened actually did me good and caused me to go in some other direction. And that's a real blessing for me to be able to do that. And also, if I could help the world, I would say that if you can look at the situations in your life, whether you like them or not, and find the gift. And so when in 2017, my house was destroyed in 10 minutes by this terrible wildfire that came through Northern California. And I mean, I had a huge suburban house that in 10 minutes became a 2-foot pile of ash. There were no sticks. There was nothing, just a curved brick staircase. I called it the stairway to heaven because that's all it was. That's all that was left. It was just astounding and shocking. And when you're in it, when you're in the middle of a terrible crisis, it's really hard to be philosophical about it. You have to give yourself the grace to get far enough away that then you can look at it and say, okay, that was my wake-up call. Because if life could turn on a dime like that, if I can go from middle class, comfortable, to homeless in 10 minutes, then I needed to find a way to make my life worthwhile, make my life matter. I also knew at the time, I was in a marriage that wasn't really working for either one of us. And when the fire happened, the relationship was the only thing we had left because everything else was gone. And that is what caused me to have to look at the relationship in a way that previously, when I had my book club and my work and my all these things that kept me busy.
All this busyness, all these possessions kept you busy and distracted. But when you had this, when fate gave you this reset, you really said, this is a reset. You were free of all this materialism and all these other, activities, and you really are allowed to have a great introspection.
Yeah. And what happened was I went into a dark night of the soul. I went into a deep depression. And I questioned, why am I even here? What is this all about? And I didn't at that time say, okay, I'm going to write books that save kids from making the kind of choices I went into. That wasn't like my revelation. But what was revealed through that situation is that if I stayed in that marriage, I wasn't going to literally die, but I was going to die. Because for months afterwards, after I left, if you asked me who I was, I wouldn't be able to answer you because I had no identity. And now I have an identity.
Identity is critical. I'm a personal development coach. It's a critical thing in coaching is the client's identity. Identity is we act according to who we think we are. And so if you don't know who you are, or who you are is not working for you, or causing you dysfunction, well, think of someone else. Be someone else, because identity is absolutely critical. Let's take a moment to get a quick moment from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with Angela Legh.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Proficio. What are the secrets to wealth? Benjamin Franklin taught them, but people are ignorant or just forget. What if you make sure neither afflicts you? Visit www.proficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can actually become certain you are on your way to wealth.
You are listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza, and Angela Legh. We're having a great conversation about a number of things. Really, I think that the essence of it is emotional intelligence. And I think that the vast majority of people don't have a great emotional intelligence. And I know I was one of them until I deliberately started working on my emotions and how important they are and how manageable they are actually. And that was it was another life that I lived when I didn't have this perspective and it didn't deliberately work on these on emotions and emotional well-being, because I was emotionally unwell and I didn't manage my emotions at all. And what you're talking about is really what we're talking about is really is increasing emotional intelligence. But and so that's really a critical part of my journey. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your healing journey? You've talked about the catalyst, and the reset, but go from there.
Okay, so after the fire, I started reading the book A Course in Miracles and went through it. That helped me. It did raise my emotional intelligence somewhat. But I started working with a coach, and her thing was all about feeling feelings. And, I was like, I'd say, I don't get mad. I never get mad. But I was in denial of my own feelings, a part of me. I was in denial of a part of who I am. And so she kind of made me... She said, okay, I want you to think about one of the times you were being yelled at, and I want you to tell me how it feels. So she forced me to sit with my feelings, and I'd be like, no, it doesn't feel good. But over time, I learned that it does go away if we face them. And even today, there are times when I become entangled in a feeling for an hour, and, we'll all get mad about something and be mad for an hour. And that means that I've grabbed onto the concept. But, we're all human. We're not ever going to be perfect in how we deal with stuff. But having the understanding and knowing that really the key to happiness is to be able to feel our feelings.
Absolutely. It's kind of funny, or almost funny, actually, how much commonality you and I have in our message and in our knowledge and what we're about is actually quite significant amount. And it makes me laugh a little bit. Absolutely. And, and as I said at the beginning, which we haven't got into yet, but I want to now, talking about suicide in children. I was a soldier. I was a soldier long ago. I went into the Army as a paratrooper, infantryman, combat soldier, and I wanted to kill for my country. It was one of my reasons. But there was another part that I didn't talk about, is that actually I wanted to be killed. I wanted to die. I wanted to be killed. And incredibly, I was very fortunate. I survived being in the Army, but I had a romance with death. I didn't have necessarily suicide ideation, but the thought of dying was not unwelcome to me. And therefore I became very extreme. I was very extreme, you know. And then years later, I got over that. You were about to say something, say it.
Well, this reminds me of, I walked into a grocery store here in town, and there was a homeless man sitting. He had a backpack filled with vodka bottles. And I went in and I noticed him, but I didn't say anything. But I was so moved by his plight that I bought a sandwich and a drink, water, and brought it out to him. But I sat down and talked to him. And it was, it got really deep. And he told me the story. His father was a Hell's Angel motorcyclist. So he had that same death doesn't fear me. I'm not afraid of death. It's something I dance with.
Right.
His father had that anger and that attitude. And when this young man was 7 years old, he watched his father slice his mother's throat open.
Oh. Whew.
And he was sent to a mental hospital, a kid, because no one told him how to deal with his feelings. And I started crying because my dad tried to kill my mom that way when I was 5.
Wow.
And I told him it's not his fault, because he had taken on all this responsibility around what had happened. But he was 7 years old. It wasn't his fault. There were adults, and their behavior was what it was. I told him about feeling his feelings, and this was something that he had never been aware of. And the conversation was making him uncomfortable. He wanted to drink because he wanted to escape the feeling. And that is so key to me. Suicide, whether it's slow suicide by drinking or drugs, or instant spontaneous, I decide today to kill myself. Suicide is a way of escaping painful feelings.
Absolutely.
People do not choose suicide when they're
happy.
joyous and happy. They're trying to escape their pain. And I know this. I haven't been suicidal ideation, but I know that I was in despair over the way my marriage was. And there was a time where I would have said, I can't divorce him because that would hurt him. I can't do that. So I had a toxic marriage that was killing me on the inside, but I couldn't leave it. So I was in this place of despair. And I remember driving one day, and I was driving over a bridge, and I thought I could just turn the wheel and my pain's going to end. So I know what it feels like to have that kind of despair, that you just want to find a way to end it. And that is what suicide is.
I think that, obviously a child's understanding is quite limited, and they really sort of make causes their own, faults their own. And that's, I had my own experience. You and this fellow that you talked with had similar experiences, but not mine. My father just left home. But the problem with me was I thought it was because I was worthless.
Right.
Right. And that was the biggest hurdle that I had to get over as a recovering addict, alcoholic, was to believe that I had, not only that I had worked, but that I deserved good things. That was a critical thing. And that was the biggest hurdle. And I found that to be a universal hurdle for recovering addicts, alcoholics. They have to believe they deserve good things. Otherwise, they're not going to bother. And so that's critical. But it's so ironic. I was messaging with somebody late night, and they were talking about a mutual friend who was really, listen, I've known a lot of crazy people. This guy is the craziest person I've ever known, and he blames his past. But the existential paradigm is this, and it's this: as children, we're not responsible for what happens to us, but as adults, we're responsible for every single action we take.
Yes.
So that's a mandate for us to heal. We must heal. That's our mandate.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I have found so valuable is a tool. So the Talmud says, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are.
Totally.
And I've believed that for a long time. However, I didn't really understand the true implications of that until one time I thought about a time when my father was screaming at me, and I was maybe 5 years old. And I pictured this situation. But then as an adult, as the adult me, I became a witness to this situation. And what did I see? A raging drunk yelling at a little kid. And the little kid made what he said her truth, that she wasn't worth anything, not even the dirt under his feet. But when I look at it from the Talmudic statement, it's revealing so much about him and nothing about me.
Totally.
And when we can look at our childhood wounds from that perspective and understand that the person criticizing us is saying everything about the world they see and nothing about who you are, then we're able to accept a new truth about ourselves, that it is untrue that I'm worthless, and very true that I'm worthwhile.
I learned long ago, and this was a critical lesson, is that nothing is personal. Nothing.
No, it's not.
People do what they do, and I might be there. And the same thing with me. I do the things I do is because how I am, and whoever's in
And
my
your
life.
circumstances, what happened that day. So
Exactly.
the person cutting you off in traffic might not be an asshole. They might be someone who had this terrible run-in with their boss, and their mind is somewhere else, and they didn't notice you. It's not personal.
Right. And even, significant relationships. My girlfriend, I treat her the way I do because of the way I am, not because of the way she is. I feel about her the way I do because of the way I am, not because of the way she is. And this is the truth about everybody and everything, and not that relationships are not significant. They absolutely are or can be. But the outer world is a reflection of my inner world.
Yes, absolutely. It's so I do a lot of meditation, and one of the meditations I do is to shrink my attention point and get my attention point into a cell of something, and then look around, and then shrink my attention point to the molecular level and look around. And it is
Great.
so true, as above, so below. It is so true
I love it.
that we are, on a cellular level, a whole universe in each cell. And, because when you imagine that you're that small and you're looking around and you see the electrons whirling and the, protons and neutrons, and you're just like, wow, that's like a solar system. And for me, it was really just kind of like, okay, this is really interesting, because yes, we are energy, and we have within each cell this whole solar system. And it's like, wow.
And in the smallest component has the information about the whole too.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. So it's not localized. It's universalized. It's just that they when they want to see what's wrong with you, they don't have to even test your whole body. They need a little blood sample. Just that blood. They can look what you in your DNA, your cell. So it's just incredible. Wow stuff. Let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with Angela Legh.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Proficio. Ever heard of accelerated learning techniques? What if you learned more deeply than ever before? What if you remembered what you learned far better than ever before? Visit www.proficio.io. That's proficio.io, where you can understand perhaps better than ever before.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza, and Angela Legh. We're having an incredible discussion about feelings and death, and this, and not certainly any morbid or morose way, but it's an important thing to think about. But there's a number of facets of our conversation, and not the least of which is personal development, a healing journey. Tell us a little bit more about your healing journey and what stood out as a significant step in your self-growth.
For me, the most significant thing was learning to be comfortable being alone, because I went from, living with my family to living with my sister to being married. And the first time I ever lived alone was after I was 50 years old. And so it was really hard, really hard for me to go to bed all by myself and go out to dinner and eat by myself. And I avoided it for it's not that I avoided going to bed because, I needed my sleep, but the eating out, I'd invite friends to go meet with me and I'd go out to eat, but I wouldn't go out by myself. And I realized, well, actually, so I signed up for Mind Valley A Fest and went to Bali in 2018. And that was the first time I had traveled by myself. And then the next year, I went to Mind Valley in Portugal and had to travel to Europe now all by myself. But I had signed up for A Fest, which is a 1 week, basically TED Talk and parties at night, TED Talk during the day. And then I went to Mind Valley University in Croatia. So it didn't make sense. They were 2 months apart. And it didn't make sense for me to fly back to America to fly over again to Croatia all within 2 months. So I decided I'm just going to live in Europe for 2 months. And me and my big suitcase, because I had 2 months worth of clothes in there, we traipsed around. So I went to Italy, Spain, France, and Italy again, and just really explored different parts of Europe. And I was alone for most of the time. When I was at Mind Valley, I was in a group, but that 2 months in between, I was all by myself. And so I had to figure out, how can I be comfortable? I don't want to be that woman who takes a book to get lost in a book while she's eating dinner. I want to enjoy my dinner. And how do I get comfortable being by myself and doing that? Because it seemed like conversation is a huge part of having a nice dinner engagement. And so it was a learning process.
And how did you do it?
I just did it.
You just did it.
Yeah.
You didn't shy away. You just did it.
Well, I was by myself and I had to eat. So at first I would, I remember I was in Trieste and in a really lovely hotel. And I looked over the dining room. There was another woman all by herself. And she was only a table away. So we started a conversation. And the next day we had a lovely trip to Lake Como together. And if I had been in a couple, I never would have struck up a conversation with her. And I never would have explored Lake Como with this lovely young woman. And so that for me was a real turning point, because I realized, hey, when you're by yourself, you have more freedom to talk to other people than when you're in a couple. So I found the silver cord, or the silver lining in that. And so that's now how I feel about it.
That's one of my many blessings, is that I'm really not only am I very comfortable to be by myself, I really need my alone time. It's a need I have. And my girlfriend doesn't understand it very much or very well. She's like, Tony. I'm like, no, Tony needs some space. Tony gives you space. There's two things going on. I need it. And I really value it. And for multiple reasons and on multiple levels. But I think it's a sign of healthiness. I'm not making any judgments, but I'm saying if you can't be alone, well, there's a reason why you should work on being alone, because there's, you got to be able to be social and to be okay with yourself.
Yeah. And you're the only person that is always going to be with you
24/7.
And so if you can't be with you, then yeah.
Absolutely. Now, talking about being with yourself, and I alluded to it several times, about, well, my father left home, about being angry, and how, and I really put the genesis of my addiction to that event of my father's departure. And I've said several times, and I don't blame my father. I don't blame him. He did the best he could with what the resources he had at the time. I don't blame him in any way. But I've said numerous times that and when there's a family split, that you really got to pay a lot of attention to the children. Perhaps get them into therapy. Be very attentive to them, and what's going on with them, and look for clues or cues. And because it's things manifest and things take seed, and a critical part is is emotions. Dealing with emotions. Now, I talked about how I really embrace death. I'll cut. I want you to talk about this, about kids and suicide, but I'll real quickly I'll mention a time where I put a gun to my head, and I was staying away from drugs as best I could. I wasn't doing a lot of drugs, but I had such psychic pain that had built up throughout my life that I just couldn't bear it anymore. And I put a gun to my head, put a bullet in the chamber, and my finger right here nestled on my temple, and my finger dancing on this trigger. And I was standing in front of, I was naked, standing in front of a full-length mirror, and I said, God, is there anything else before I pull this fucking trigger? And I didn't hear a voice of God, but I got a message that I understood that had no language. And it said, don't do it. And I laid down in bed for 3 days, phone ringing off the hook, didn't do anything, laid in bed, and did the opposite of Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, where I wasn't clicking my heels, I was clicking my toes for 3 days. I lay there for 3 days doing my feet click, and the phone ringing off the hook, people leave a message, where are you, what's going on? Finally, my mother came over, and I said the magic words, which I had never uttered in my life. I said, Mom, I need help. I need help. I had never uttered those words in my life. And that really begun my transformation, my journey of healing, like you're talking about. Now, let's talk about children and suicide, which you have something to say about.
So, children are our greatest gift. And we as parents, we don't get a manual. We don't know the rules. We work on how we were treated. And, sometimes we'll say, well, my dad was terrible. I'm not going to be that kind of person. So we choose the opposite of what we had. But a lot of our parenting is based on how we were parented. And our parents didn't have tools. They didn't know. And so, we live now in this world where there's meditation and there's mindfulness and self-development and all these tools that can help us to be the kind of parent who raises emotionally resilient children. But there's this history that just keeps getting repeated. And what I honestly feel that if parents listened to their children without interrogation, without suggesting solutions, but listened and validated the way the child was feeling, that would go a long way in reducing child suicide. Because the factors involved in child suicide include feeling unworthy, include feeling responsible for what's going on in the adult's life, which children will do, there's stress over expectations of parents. So in my children's book, I have a parent's guide at the end, and it talks about stop trying to make a mini-me. And we all know what that means. I was a lawyer, you're going to be a lawyer, your grandfather was a lawyer, we're all lawyers, and you're going to be a lawyer. But maybe this kid is someone who has a huge talent for art. And the parents will say, well, you're never going to make money in art, so you need to pursue law. And that way you're going to have a successful job, and then you could do art on the side. They're trying, and they're doing the best they know as parents, because they think that their idea of what a success is the child's idea of what a success is. But maybe to the child, being a success means living in a hut on Hawaii and painting pictures. And who's to say that's a bad choice? So what I encourage parents to do is to let go of their ideas and their expectations of what will make their child a success, and allow the child to follow their heart. And if the child isn't able to become a huge success as an artist, maybe that's okay. Maybe happiness is more important than success.
Than career success.
Yeah.
Right. There's all different
Yeah.
kinds of successes and wealth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you for that.
No, not at all. This is great stuff. Okay, we're going to take our final commercial break, and we're going to come back with the last segment with Angela Legh. Great stuff. I'm loving this stuff, Angela.
Thank you.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. Do you know why most wealthy people are that way? It's because they think like wealthy people, and a fool and his money are soon parted. Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can actually transfer the wealth mentality into your own brain, and you will think wealth.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. We're here with the lovely Angela Legh. We're talking about great stuff. There's so many sides to it, but we left off about parents allowing their children to be themselves. And I want to continue from there. You want to continue from there? You want to go into emotional mastery, Angela?
Well, I think I've pretty much said
Yeah,
everything that I had to say about, but it is key to recognize our children for who they are and allow them to be who they are, because
absolutely,
each child has a unique gift that they're bringing into the world. We may not understand it. You know, the kid who designed crypto, when talking to his parents, you know, they were probably like, what are you talking about? Right. We don't get this at all.
Get a good job.
I'm not even sure if I still get crypto.
I don't get it. I've been trying to learn it for a long time. I don't get it. It's so, I know I want to get involved with it, but I don't understand it.
But this is a perfect example of how a child may have an understanding of something that is so out of our wheelhouse that we can't see how that could ever be a success. But oh my gosh, look at that.
I think that what parents really need to teach their children, I mean, that's to teach them whatever they deem is appropriate, certainly, but is as has been the resonant subject here, is emotional intelligence. Yep. How to feel their feelings, that their feelings are signals, that their feelings come from thoughts, that you can manage your thoughts. You know, when you have that understanding, then you won't suffer from your feelings later on. And you can accept things much more readily. I think that is a critical thing, is emotional intelligence. Teach parents really, you're like, emotional intelligence, probably most parents never even heard of it. Well, learn about it. learn about it, because your kids need it. You probably need it. I need it. And I strive to increase it all the time.
And I would say that the thing is, if you had read my children's books when you were a child, or I had read my children's books when I was a child, we would have been equipped to face the feelings that we avoided, and we could have avoided decisions made on trying to avoid feelings that caused us tremendous pain. And so when you say emotional intelligence, it is a life skill that is so critical. Not only do kids need it, but adults need it. And
how do you incorporate emotional mastery tools in a children's story?
Well, in book 1 of the Bella Santini Chronicles, I believe it's chapter 6 or 7, the main character, Bella, is taken to an alternative dimension. And in this dimension, it's a world peopled by feelings.
Wait, repeat that.
It's a world that is peopled by feelings. There are no physical people, only energetic feelings.
Wow, wonderful.
And in this particular chapter, the main character and her compatriot have a quest, so they must accomplish something in this world. So they have to figure out how to maneuver, because they don't, when they get there, they don't realize that it's peopled by feelings. As they're going down a hallway, they are overcome by the feeling of sadness, and both of them just crumble on the floor. And they're sort of rescued by the feeling of hope that swoops by, and they're able to come up out of the sadness. But that starts a discussion. Okay, I guess this place is full of feelings. How do we get through? What tools can we use to get to the other side and accomplish our task? And so not only is there that discussion during the actual task, but when they get back to the fairy school, their friends ask them, how did you get through this? And so that starts a whole nother discussion about different tools for managing feelings.
It's almost genius. It's fantastic. That is wonderful. Great stuff. I'm really looking forward to promoting this book in right here, right now. So let's wind it up. That's I'm gonna have to check out that book. That is great. So we've had an awesome conversation and discussion, a great discourse. Angela, would you like to have some final remarks?
Well, yeah, and what I always say at the end is to give yourself grace. We're all learning and growing, and a lot of the tools that are included in my book are things that I didn't know until I was 50 something. So I'm paying it forward to kids so that they don't have to go through what I went through. But
what do you mean precisely by grace? Just so people are clear on that.
Surround yourself with love. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We are so often quick to criticize ourselves. And that's not love. Really, it is not love for ourselves. And so when I talk about self-love, I talk not only about eating right and exercising and caring for our bodies, but caring for your emotions and your thoughts, and when you look in the mirror, can you say, I love me? And not count the things that are wrong. Can you count the things that are right? It's loving your feelings, allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to feel your feelings. Catching yourself when you say, I'm so stupid. And redirecting and saying, gosh, I made a mistake. Because you're not stupid, but you are human.
Great
and
stuff.
that's what giving yourself grace is.
Great stuff. Beautiful. And I also understand you have a free gift for our audience, for the listeners and viewers.
I do, because one of the big things that children are dealing with, especially because of the COVID lockdowns, is anxiety. So I have a guide on my website. It's free downloadable to soothe anxiety in your children. And it's different tools, breathing techniques, mindfulness, just different tools that you can use to soothe anxiety in your child.
Great stuff. And that's at your website. Say what your website is, please, and spell it.
It's AngelaLegh.com, AngelaLegh.com.
Make careful note that people, Legh is spelled Legh. Not the way you might be used to, but Legh. So that's Angela Legh spelled Legh. And so this has been a wonderful discourse. I really appreciate it very much. I encourage people to go to angelalegh.com, get that PDF or whatever format it is in. All your social media will be on your page at our website at Self-Help Coaching. You're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, you're on LinkedIn, you're on YouTube, you're on Twitter. All that stuff will be listed so they can check it out. And your message is wonderful. What you're about is awesome. I'm delighted in getting it out, and I want to learn more about it. I really appreciate your time and what you do. And would you like to say goodbye?
I would. Thank you so much. And I love humanity, and I just want everyone to know that they are loved.
I used to hate the world, and now I love the world. And that's simply because I healed and I transformed. And that's what it's about. Loving the world is very possible, and it's a wonderful place if you look for it. Angela, thank you very much for being here and everything. I appreciate it. And I remember my mantra, everyone is responsible for themselves, and we can all use a little help. Thank you very much. This is Tony Petrozza. We'll see you next time at the Self-Help Coaching Podcast. Thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. Remember to visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Self-Help Coaching Podcast.